Well, good afternoon. My name's Gemma Dale. I'm from the University of Manchester, and today I'm talking about mental health with Dr. Warren Manzoor from the Division of Psychology and Mental Health, also from the University of Manchester. So first of all, Warren, thank you very much for your time. We've now been living through this current situation for a couple of months, and we know that mental health is being impacted by COVID-19. Can you tell us a bit about why that is?
Well, many people will have seen the reports and news about different ways that it impacts on mental health, but it's worth reminding ourselves these are unprecedented times. Myself and most of my colleagues engaged in research haven't been doing research under these kinds of situations, this kind of global situation before. And so we need to look to similar situations, or we need to look at some kind of real broad principles about what can impact on mental health. What's clear is that people have got much less access to all the kinds of support and resources they would normally have. Some people would have been having face-to-face therapy and care coordinated support in person. There'll be people with friendship networks, family networks, work networks that are much more impoverished in terms of their availability. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about the role of exercise and engagement with nature and how that's become restricted as well. So there literally are so many factors that we share, but also there'll be factors for individuals. This experience for some people will mean much more than for others, and that meaning will be very personalized. And for some people it brings back memories of being stuck at home for other reasons, maybe previous illnesses, previous family difficulties, etc. And for people who were just about managing before this happens, and now they're having to make all kinds of compromises in their lives, this can be the tipping point really that then makes it harder to have the usual way of coping that they've done before, and then that can kind of escalate into other issues. And you've seen the different kinds of challenges that people have pointed to in terms of evidence, such as domestic violence and addictions, and depression, social isolation, etc.
I saw an interview you gave recently with the Manchester Evening News, and you talked about control as a factor and having less control. How does that matter for mental health?
Yeah. So myself and many colleagues have the view that control is essential to mental health. Whenever you read descriptions of people's difficulty with mental health problems, the loss of control and lack of control, which is often described as helplessness, is tantamount and key to those. People can lose control over their moods, their behaviour. They can sometimes feel like they've lost control over themselves and who they are. People can lose their control over eating. They can lose control over all kinds of different emotions: anger, anxiety, panic, etc. It's interesting how much we take control for granted. When we have our daily routine, when we leave the house and we come home at night and we engage in all kinds of things, we drive around, we talk, we do our work, all these things we're doing they rely on control. These things are extremely complex activities that we do, but we do them automatically, and we don't realise how much we naturally have control over our lives on a day-to-day basis, because it's so easy for us to just talk and see friends and go to work, etc. When this suddenly stops, then suddenly those ways that we had for being in control of our lives and our experiences, that suddenly stops as well. And so there's that kind of abrupt feeling of, well, I'm not getting what I want here, or I'm not able to avoid the things I normally avoid. And that gives us a feeling of lack of control. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who's been going through this lockdown experience has experienced loss or lack of control. And it really depends on how this whole experiences panned out for that person and their lives. And sometimes you can lose control in one domain of your life and get control in another, and that's very much down to the individual. There have been some stories of people that have really built and nourished relationships because they've had that time for them in lockdown to work on them, and other times that people have been absolutely cut from a lifeline because of the lockdown. So it really is an individual matter as to how this impacts on people.
I've certainly seen that from the conversations that I've had with people, you know, from one person that's completely overwhelmed because they're caring for people or they're combining homeschooling with work, to people who are on furlough and are experiencing this situation entirely differently. They've got a real loss of purpose. And you know, some of those people who are not working are quite lonely and isolated as well. At the time that we're obviously recording this, we're several months into this crisis. And we're also now actually starting to move out of lockdown and seeing some restrictions ease and a bit more of that on the horizon. How can people sort of stay resilient as this situation sort of carries on for a little longer?
Okay. Yeah, I think sometimes there's this expectation that as we come down the hill from the lockdown, that it should just be kind of all in a positive direction. But a lot of people will have been holding things in and managing up until now, and that expectation that things should be okay now can be a challenge in and of itself. And those people who have managed under, you know, extreme circumstances, they may have lost a loved one, they may have been separated from people that they're very close to, they may have lost their job. Those people who've just kept it together because they needed to, and now there's this expectation that we're returning to normality, they might feel, and they probably will feel, that they'll need to kind of manage those things they've gone through and kind of work through them themselves. They might need an opportunity to actually re-engage in normality. And there could be all kinds of resentments, issues, anxieties that built up over that time. For some people, not for others. But that opportunity to respect each person's individual experiences through this, and that for each of us, we probably have a story and we probably need to tell it to somebody, and that can help us to piece it all together and work out how we're going to resolve those last couple of months with what's going on in the future. And there's so many uncertainties that needs working through and working out as well. So a lot of the work we do is about supporting people to discover what are really at the heart of where they're struggling, where they're stuck. And to do that, people need to be listened to, people need to be actively listened to. That can be done within a relationship with a close loved one, a friend or a family member. Other people might seek professional help for that. There's also other avenues for people that haven't got those opportunities. There's something called expressive writing or journaling, which is about just writing down about what the difficulties are, and often when it reminds you of other similar difficulties. And there's evidence to show that engaging in that process at your own pace is one that can help people manage this, sort out the problems, and overall in the long term be less distressed by it.
And I understand you're doing some research into that area at the moment.
Yes.
If somebody was thinking, I might be interested in having a go at that, I could see that writing about my experience would be really useful. What should they write about?
They need to write about what's bothering them, what's on their mind, what are the kind of thoughts that keep on popping into their head when they're trying to get on with something else and they're not quite kind of managed better. It could be worries, it could be feelings of loss, it could be annoyance or irritability with somebody or something that just keeps on coming back to them and affecting their mood. So it's the thing that's bothersome is what people, when you know they've got the opportunity in talking to work through, or in expressive writing, it's what you need to be able to put into words and to kind of describe what are your feelings about them, what it brings to mind, and also where you're in conflict about it, where one part of you wants to go with this thing and one part of you doesn't. And there's so much about inner conflict around this lockdown, around should I go out, how far should I obey the rules to the letter, you know, how grey an area is it, and can I use that grey area to get something I need, to see my mother, to kind of give my children some play, etc. So people are constantly trying to work out how to prioritize things for themselves and their family against the rules and the greater good about protecting other people from infection. And everyone's on a different kind of set of balances with that. There's no absolute right and wrong, as we've seen from the media, but clearly everybody needs to feel at ease enough with their own decisions that they make during this process. And you could argue that, you know, in that area, when the guidelines are uncertain, that gives people more need for talking these things through and working out, well, where do I really stand on this, and how am I going to balance my own needs with those of the community.
Back to that idea of uncertainty again, aren't we? Now, we're at a situation now where lots of organisations are actually thinking about coming back to work and are planning for that. Well, for some people that will be back to work because they may be coming off furlough. For others who've been working from home, it's more like back to a workplace. And listening to what you were saying before about people being in, you know, having a very different experience. What do you think we might see around people's mental health as they actually transition back into workplaces?
Again, and I kind of apologise for coming back to this kind of default, but everybody's experience is going to be so different. You know, some people are going to have relief about being back to work. For other people, you know, this was the job that actually they were going to leave anyway. So there's going to be so much variety there. So all we can do is respect that different people are coming from different places with this and with this transition. For some people, it's going to be a really hard process, really difficult because of what this crisis has brought upon them and their family. For other people, they might be seeing this as the opportunity they needed to change their business direction, change their life direction, improve their relationships. And for other people, it's going to be both of those things. So what we can do is not impose our own standards and our own expectations on other people. We can just listen and hear that there are so many different perspectives. There is no one right answer to whether this situation is a good or a bad thing for each person. And for many people, it's both, and it's all ends of the spectrum. And it's hard. We have to respect that. We have to respect that diversity of experience around any kind of challenge, any trauma even. And when we're going through this is an opportunity for us to realise that quite how diverse people's perspectives are. And it's hard to realise that there's no right or wrong about how someone should feel about this, because it feels like there should be certainty. But I think the best thing we can learn from this is that each of us can be challenged or threatened in different ways by a situation like this.
You sort of mentioned earlier about some of the, you know, the advice that's out there around things like exercise and nature. Is there anything just from either your research or your insights or just things you've heard that people are doing to look after their mental health that might be a bit different to some of the advice people have already seen and heard?
I mean, my kind of primary advice has always been around having what I was saying earlier, having an opportunity to find a safe space or a safe person to talk through what is troubling you and bothering you. And many people can do that in the relationships they have. Other people need to do it in the ways that I've described earlier. That seems to be the most universal thing. And even Barack Obama talked about in his presidency, he wanted to have that 10-15 minutes a day where he could just ponder over things. It's that sort of pondering time to kind of reflect and to kind of reassimilate and think, you know, I might make, you know, a bit of a change here. I think that giving that flexibility for ourselves is the one rule that seems to work for everybody. Everything else is really down to personal preferences and personal balance. You know? For some people, exercise is their identity, and they're going to need so much more than others, as in nature, as in work, as in family life. So it's very hard to produce specific advice around that, except maybe to say that, you know yourself as a person, you know what your basic needs are. And if this lockdown experience has made that extremely hard to receive, whether it be a friendship group that you've not been in touch with for ages, whether it be a sport that you've not done for ages, whether it be a aspect of your work or creativity that you've not been able to put into practice, then you're going to know that, and you're going to notice it. And then it's just about, well, how do I find that in a different way? And some of that advice in those blogs and articles was just ways that people had found to meet their needs. And different people would find different ways. For some people, they can share the same thing. So some of those things were like sort of social media challenges and getting a pet or getting a pot plant or whatever. But you know, those things are going to be very different, and it's that creativity that's key. So read around, look at what everyone's doing, and select the thing and try it out where you feel that, oh, that actually might be something that works for me. It might not. If it doesn't, move on, find something else. So it's that kind of being open to ways to get your needs met, your different needs met. That's the important bit, rather than any kind of key bit of advice, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely, and I think that's a really, really useful takeaway.
And I guess one thing I should say is that, you know, the advice can be given from common sense or opinion, and what I've said sounds like common sense and opinion. It is, but it is also underpinned by kind of scientific evidence and theory that when people are stuck, and when that's an extreme state, as in a mental health problem, but even in short-term distress, the brain needs a process to go through, be able to articulate and put into awareness the kinds of feelings and thoughts and ideas. They need to sit in there for a period of time for our brains to do something that comes up with a solution. And so the idea is that we do something called reorganization. But to do that, we need to be able to bring it to our awareness, talk about it, think about it, read about it, play it over in our minds. And only when we actually put ourselves in that position to put the time aside to think about it, do we get the chance to come up with that solution. So there is a kind of a learning theory around how we can be creative and lateral minded and flexible, and it is all about kind of being truly even handed and open and trying out different ways and different ways of making connection and different priorities.
That's brilliant. That's been a really, really interesting conversation. I think there's some real practical takeaways there for people to have a think about. So thank you again very much for your time. And again, thank you to everybody who's taken the time to watch. Thanks for listening.